Welcome to the Bronx African American History Project. My name is Stephen Payne, librarian and archivist at the Bronx County Historical Society, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Nason, professor of African American.
So I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Dr. Mark Nason, co-founder of the Bronx African American History Project and a professor of African American Studies and History at Fordham University.
Great, thank you, Mark. And we have the pleasure today of speaking with Charlotte Dickerson. And Charlotte's gonna say everything, hopefully that we can hope for about her life. But I'll just say that she's a retired criminal defense attorney, an activist, and she's the daughter of Dr. Angie Dickerson, who was a Bronxite who dedicated her life to struggles for economic justice, racial equality, African independence, and world peace. And it runs in the family. Her grandson Angelo Guisado is a civil rights attorney here in New York City as well. So we begin these oral history interviews by asking, why don't you tell us a little bit about your family and how they ended up in the Bronx, Charlotte?
I can say that I was the youngest, so I don't have the full picture. However, it's my understanding that they ended up in the Bronx because of the unique building development where they came to live and where I was born. It was a workers' commune-sponsored development called the Coops.
Yeah, the Coops.
In the Northeast Bronx. And when I came along, of course, they had been well established there, but it's my understanding that we were the first Black family in the development. And I'm sure that part of the reason why we were invited to come and live there was because of my mother's connection in the progressive community, as well as my father's. My father was a chauffeur originally and developed his own transportation business. And part of the charter section of his business involved taking Jewish progressives, Marxites, to Camp Kinderland, which was a resort for progressive people, particularly of the Hebrew persuasion, in the summer and during meetings. And because of that, my father, as well as my mother, was well known in the progressive community. And as you might know, the Coops was a workers' utopia and very much in the milieu of progressive action. And that's how we came to live in the Coops.
Right. Now, I'm curious, what elementary school did you go to?
I went to PS 96 in the Bronx. The principal was Louis Lipschitz.
And what street was it on?
It's Waring. It's Waring Avenue.
And were there other children from the Coops in the school?
Well, yes, my best friend from the Coops, Judy Block, who lived 3 houses over from me, was in my class at PS 96. And I don't remember in my age group other children. There were children who came along after me that went to PS 96, but I was pretty much, me and Judy were pretty much the youngest ones until another good friend, Yehudi, who was of Jewish persuasion and whose parents were Orthodox Jews, also came along.
Were there other African-American children in the school?
Not at the time I was there. Of course, my older brother had attended and my cousin Lori had attended, but our family was pretty much the only Black family at that time. Remember, we're talking the 50s, the early 50s.
This is the early 50s.
Early 50s.
Right, okay, yeah. So you and I are in the same sort of age cohort.
I made 72 this past Sunday.
I'm 74, so okay, so we are, all right. And I, also a product of New York City public schools. So when you were, so in the 1950s, there were a number of anti-discrimination struggles in the Bronx. And I want to see if this is something you were aware of and or participated in.
Well, I
I
participated in the protests at the White Castle.
At the White Castle.
Okay.
Yes,
So
I was there.
that was in the 60s, right?
Okay, I don't listen, brother.
1963 with the White Castle protest.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I want to see, because this may have been you were too young to be fully aware. Were you aware of protests at Parkchester which was an all white development?
Yes, I was aware of that.
So this is something you were aware of.
Yes, I was also aware of the exclusively white Jewish Shore Haven.
Oh yes, the Shore Haven Club.
Oh,
right.
yes.
Okay.
So
not only did they not take Black people, I had a cousin whose mother is Jewish from Bavaria, Germany, and older sister were allowed to go, but because she was a little bit browner than the other members of her family, she was not allowed to go.
Right.
I'm very well aware of the Shore Haven situation.
Right. So those were, in my own research, were there other anti-discrimination struggles in the Bronx that you were aware of, other than those two and the White Castle? Were there other things that people talked about?
Nothing comes to mind. If you have something in mind you want to mention, I can tell you whether or not I remember it.
Were there any neighborhoods you were told not to go into because they weren't safe?
Oh, hell no. I'm my mother's child. We went where we wanted, when we wanted. I was aware of the tension between the Italians and the Blacks at Columbus High School, because my older cousin Lori went to Columbus, and she was very fair with curly hair like an Italian. Yeah. And she may have been mistaken for an Italian, but she would be quick to tell you, no, I'm Black. So I was aware of the tension between the Italians, and these were young teenagers. I'm not saying the older family members.
No, because I have a friend of mine, Paul Cannon, who's a distinguished principal in the Bronx, and he had to run home from Columbus to his home in Morrisania.
Yes.
In the 60s.
That's
so, and then of course, Arthur Avenue, that neighborhood was dangerous for at least young Black men to go into.
Well, Arthur Avenue had a wonderful, I don't know if it's Arthur Avenue or Tremont, I think it was Arthur Avenue, had a wonderful market. And we used to go there and buy coconut bread. So perhaps this is before I came along.
Right.
But they used to have a wonderful market. I'm not aware of the Arthur Avenue.
Right, okay. A couple of other questions from me before, that one of the people who, in my research on Morrisania, we spent a lot of time studying was a minister named Reverend Edler Hawkins. Is this somebody who, you remember like visiting your house, or?
Can you tell me what church he was aligned?
It was
St. Augustine.
St. Augustine's Presbyterian.
Augustine, St. Augustine.
Augustine. Right. On, on Prospect Avenue and 165th Street.
Yes. My great aunt, Aunt Press, was a founding member of St. Augustine, and my aunt Jenny, we called her Mother Jenny, as well, was a founding member of St. Augustine's.
Wow.
But this is the group before me, and my older brother and cousin would know about them. My brother was 6 years older, and cousin Lori was 8 years older.
Right.
But they would have been going to that church from time to time, particularly when they had programs. So right. I don't know of the Reverend particularly, but I am familiar and did go to St. Augustine, yes.
Now, did they ever talk about this whole shape-up phenomenon called the Black slave market, where Black women lined up on the street to get picked up, for domestic work?
No, I don't know anything about that.
Okay. So I'm just trying to place you in relation to, you know, certain events that those were, you know, the early 50s and also the 30s.
I was born in 48. I didn't start public school until I was 6. So that would be
54,
54.
right? Okay.
Sure. Charlotte,
Yes.
do you remember exactly when your family moved into the Coops? That's one thing I've been wondering
I
about.
wasn't born yet.
Yeah, but they'd lived there for a number of years before you came along, I
Oh,
think, right?
well, yes. As I say, my brother was 6 years older than me, so that would put it at 42.
Okay.
And they had 2 children. My mother had 2 miscarriages before Stephen. So I would say that it was the 30s, the late 30s when they moved in.
Wow, so they moved in very early on.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. We had the best apartment in all of the houses.
Oh, really? Okay. Did you overlook
H1.
the park?
H1 facing Bronx Park.
Oh, nice.
And we had 5 rooms, 3 bedrooms, living room, kitchen, dining room. We had the best apartment in the whole development.
What are your best memories about growing up in the Coops? The things like it will make you smile when you think about it.
My best memories, besides the friendships I had and playing at Zimmerman Playground, were going to Bronx Park. It was right across the street. I remember when they built Marshallou Parkway and cut through the park. I used to go to the park and I knew how to get through the park to the botanical gardens, no fee, no fences. And I would very often go all through Bronx Park. There wasn't a fear or a timidity about any malfeasance. You know, nowadays you can't go to a park without a knife in your pocket. But I love going to the park. And I went by myself and I hiked and ran and jumped and played. That was a very happy time for me. And I also enjoyed going to Zimmerman Playground.
Where was Zimmerman Playground?
It's on Barker Avenue, the northeastern side of the Coops.
Got it.
Yeah. And I just had a very happy childhood.
Mm-hmm. What were the kind of foods that were that you grew up eating in your family? What sort of cuisine? Was there a particular, you know?
My mother was a chef. She could have been a Michelin-starred chef with her own restaurant if she had so chosen. Mm-hmm. So anything from lobsters in red sauce to sukiyaki to, she cooked everything, to duck, to goose, no venison. We don't eat Bambi. She cooked everything.
Now, did she ever have like dinner parties where people were invited?
Absolutely, absolutely. Very often we had dinner parties, but they were always for a cause. There was a motive involved. Mm-hmm. It was to raise money for this soul who was in jail, for this project that was to be started to help with transportation costs to bring Paul Robeson or Dr. Du Bois or Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, before he was president of Ghana, stayed in our home. My mother—
You're kidding. He actually was a guest in your home.
Oh, yes. My mother was a member at the first Pan-African and Women of African Descent Conference in Ghana, 1950, I want to say 54. And prior to that, when Nkrumah came to the UN, my mother hosted him in our home with several prominent African-American leaders and progressive leaders. William L. Patterson, Louise Patterson, Paul Robeson.
So Paul Robeson was at your home?
I used to ride on his shoulders.
And Essie too was there, right?
And Essie Robeson.
So they were there. Was Dr. Du Bois ever at your home?
I'm sure he was. It probably was when I was very little, because I don't recall.
Right.
But I'm
Paul
40.
Robeson, you remember vividly.
Yes, because he used to my mother had a bookcase of shelves in the hallway between the dining room and the back bedroom. And my mother hid my water gun on the very top shelf. And when Paul came, I asked him to please let me ride on his shoulders. And I got the water gun. And I remember it vividly because he told me, now you have to know who to aim at when you shoot that gun, the water gun. And so that's a vivid memory for me. He was very sweet and very endearing to a very precocious and bratty little girl. I really was a pain in the ass, if you can pardon my expression. I wanted to be part of everything, if not the star of everything.
Right. Now, did you ever have a chance to hear him sing live?
I'm sure I must have. I don't recall. I know I've heard him sing on tape and
Right.
at presentations. He had a beautiful voice, but I don't know if I saw him in person. My memory is fading as I age. My father had Alzheimer's, and I'm very much afraid I'm developing incipient early onset Alzheimer's. So much of my memories are failing me, and that's a shame.
Yeah. Now, one other question about music. Did folk musicians ever perform at your apartment?
Oh, well, listen, I went to Camp Higley Hill in Vermont, Wilmington, Vermont, with Max, and I think his wife's name was Helen. And it was a progressive camp, and folk singing was a big deal. And we did have folk singers at the house. We had opera at the house. My Aunt Ingrid from Bavaria, was a soprano. I think I don't know if it's a lyric soprano, but yes, we had folk songs, we had opera. My father was a big opera buff. I had a complete set of the librettos of the 100 greatest operas of all times. Classical music was big in the house. We listened to Schubert, we listened to Mozart. Mozart was a lightweight. We listened to, I grew up with classical music. I played an instrument and my brother played an instrument. My brother was a student at Music and Art High School.
Right.
He was offered a chance to study to be a conductor. He had great conductor skills. He went a different direction. I myself played the oboe. We all started on the recorder and then the clarinet, and I went to the oboe.
Now,
so I grew up in a musical household.
When you were in junior high school, were you in the school orchestra?
Yes, and the band.
And which junior high school did you attend?
135.
And what street was that on?
Junior high school 135 is up the other side of Boston Road. Don't get me started, but you can look it up. It's still there.
130. So you could walk there.
Oh,
or
absolutely.
Did you have to take a bus?
I was in 7SP5.
Oh, okay.
I skipped the 8th grade and went from 7th to 9th.
Yeah, I remember that. I was also in the SP.
Okay.
And what high school did you go to?
I went to Performing Arts High School as a dance major.
Okay, wow. And that
I was
so
accepted.
you had to go to Manhattan to.
Yes, it wasn't my first choice. I was also accepted to Music and Art for the oboe, and that's where I wanted to go. My mother and father told me they had spent the past 10 years sending me for dance lessons, and they wanted a return on their investment, and so I was forced to go to Performing Arts.
Right. And what sort of dance were you trained in? Was it many varieties or?
Ballet, modern, character.
Okay. Right. So you were attending public schools when they still had bands and orchestras in the middle schools.
Absolutely.
Did you get to take home a musical instrument?
The oboe.
Yeah. But yeah. So yeah, I was also in the high school band at Erasmus Hall High School, but I was a terrible saxophone player.
Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn, yeah. I grew up in Crown Heights. So, and this is all around the
I
same.
remember when blacks couldn't go to Crown Heights, or at least
Well,
it was difficult.
It was interesting. And there were black families in my part of Crown Heights.
The Pattersons lived in Crown Heights. William L. and Louise Patterson lived in Crown Heights on President Street.
On what street? President. Yeah, that was the nice block.
That's where they
lived. That
lived.
was the block with the beautiful houses. I lived in on Lefferts Avenue near an Italian neighborhood that people called Pigtown.
Oh,
that was the tough part of Crown Heights.
You didn't want to go there.
I don't know.
I used to go look at the mansions in President Street and say, "Ooh, who lives there?"
He's taking over your meeting, Steve.
Hey, that's good. I'm just going with the flow, and
Okay.
So those are the kind of questions I always ask, and this is from me probably the 370th interview I've done for the. And
you didn't ask me how it was to be black in a white community, and if you ask me, I'll tell you.
Well, we just asked you.
How was it to be black in a white community, Charlotte?
Growing up and going to PS 96, every day of my life after school, I had to fight, and I fought Michael Letterman because Michael Letterman would call me nigger. My mother taught me, if anyone used that word to me, I should try and take their head off. And that's precisely what I did. I grew up as a tomboy. I grew up fighting, and I fought boys, and I beat boys. So that's how it was to grow up.
Now, Michael Letterman, was he from the Coops, or he was from out? He was a Coop kid.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So how did that happen? That you had somebody in a progressive development using the N-word?
Because at that time, we're talking now, late 50s, early 60s, many of the progressives were old, and young people, young parents were coming in, and they came in with all of their baggage. And some of that baggage was racism. And as a black child, and everybody else is white, if there were thorns, slings, and arrows of outrageous fortune, they were all aimed at me. And I fought back.
And did other kids defend you?
I defended myself. No, other kids didn't defend me. In fact, some of whom I thought were my best friends shied away at a certain point, I would say junior high schoolish.
Sure.
Wow.
Because I was not seen as an appropriate friend to have for a decent young white girl.
Wow.
Hey, baby, try living my shoes.
No, but see, the thing is that it's not shocking to me at all that happened in the Bronx. I didn't realize that it would happen in the Coops, which I thought would be a refuge.
You have to put it in context. This is later on.
Okay.
I was no longer a little innocent pigtail girl. I'm talking about when I had maybe 10, 12, 13 years of age. But Mikey Letterman, I used to have to fight, but I didn't mind because I beat his ass. My brother used to have to fight, but it got to a point where the other kids wouldn't fight him because he would always win. So I grew up very much a tomboy in the shadow of my brother, and I did what he did. That is, if someone was mean to me or cruel to me or pushed me, I would defend myself. We were always taught to defend yourself.
Absolutely.
And not to allow others to stick up for you. You stick up for yourself.
Yeah. Now, did that happen at performing arts too, or was that?
No. Performing arts is like professional children's school. You were so busy, dedicated to your art, to your craft. It left no time for personal relationships. Your only motive was to be better at your craft. It did occur in one manner. The head of the dance department, Dr. Yoakum, called me into her office on one occasion, and it was on two occasions. One was after I went to see the Russian ballet. Because of my mother's status in the progressive community, we had very fine seats and invited to the reception when the Bolshoi or the Kirov would come to town. And I went to see and met Galina Ulanova and Maya Plisetskaya in their prima ballerina performances. And I went to the reception. I had cold cucumber soup, and I was treated as a part of the community. And I was very proud of that. But when I took it to the head of the dance department at Performing Arts, I was very severely lectured about the undesirability, number one, of associating with communists, never mind they're prima ballerinas of the highest level in the world. And number two, as a Black girl, I shouldn't hope to be a ballet dancer because there were no Blacks in ballet, and therefore I would have to confine myself to be a modern dance major.
Jesus. This is like what Malcolm X had experienced in junior high school. It's described.
I don't know about Malcolm X. I know I could have been the Misty Copeland of my times if only I had been given a chance.
Wow.
So I guess that pretty much deterred you from pursuing dance after that. Is that right?
No, actually, no. I did a double andedant pirouette, that's counterclockwise, and wrenched my knee and tore all the cartilages out.
Ooh.
And at that time, there wasn't cartilage replacement surgery like you have today. And the orthopedist told me I would never dance professionally. I was out of school for 6 months and had to transfer to a public high school.
Ooh.
So which school did you transfer to?
Evander Childs High School.
Know it well. I also interviewed people who were chased home from Evander.
Oh, I was never chased home.
What?
I was never chased home. We had a Black group, Jamal's Leaguers, made up of the African American and Caribbean students of color. So
wow. And this is in the mid-'60s, right?
Well, I graduated in 1965.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm talking about the 50s.
Oh no, in the 50s I was in grade school.
Okay. So, were there any teachers at your elementary school or junior high school that participated in some sort of, racial profiling or what today would call microaggressions towards you?
I don't recall any of that.
It was more from the other kids.
Well, certain kids.
Certain kids.
So yeah, I wouldn't paint so wide a swath with the brush to say all kids. There were a few knuckleheads, and I was pretty popular with Black kids and white kids. You have to understand, I had to be popular with the white kids because I was the only Black kid in my class, like forever.
Yeah.
Until 9 SP5, when O'Connor Young joined our class, I was the only Black in the SPs.
Mm-hmm.
So if I wanted a friend, it was going to be a white friend.
Mm-hmm.
And Charlotte, on that, you had cousins that lived in the Coops as well, but they were all older than you. Is that right?
One was older. My cousin Lori Taylor, She's the daughter of my mother's baby brother, Uncle Bill. She's 8 years older than me. My mother raised her for 6 years, and she became very close with my brother Stephen.
Mm.
And they treated me awfully. I was the little kid, and so if you know anything at all, the little kid gets dumped on by the 2 older kids. Were you a younger kid?
Yeah.
Oh my God, they made my life a wreck. They would pull nasty jokes on me, but tricks. Lori lived in the second court with Uncle Bill and Ingrid. And after Lori, Uncle Bill had remarried to Ingrid. Ingrid wasn't Lori's mother. Lori's mother was Scotty.
Mm-hmm.
And Scotty left. She couldn't take the stress of the interracial marriage. That's when Lori came to live in my household with my mother.
Mm.
And the second wife, Ingrid, married Uncle Bill and had Sharon and Melissa. Sharon was about 5 years younger than me. Melissa is around today, and she lives in the Bronx. And that was the family that I had in the Coops.
Mm-hmm. Now, when did you start getting involved in the civil rights movement? You know, in the 60s?
You mean riding on Paul Robeson's shoulders wasn't being involved?
I'm talking about the you know, the stuff that everybody talks about. This, you know, not the left, you know, progressive thing.
They're
you know,
intertwined. I don't separate it, and I don't think you should either. I was raised politically. I see events politically, and because of that, the struggle that African Americans have always had and will continue to have is not only a question of racism, it's a question of capitalism, because capitalism is built on and supported by and propped up by racism. That's how your president gets away with all of the outrageous things that he says and does. It appeals to those who do not have a political understanding of how the world works and how we are truly brothers and sisters. So I can't say when I got started. I'm born into it and I'm still into it. I work at a Rise for Social Justice. Does that tell you anything?
Yeah. I'm just curious about, like, when the Bronx chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality.
Roy Innes. I don't know about the Bronx chapter. I know Roy Innes. He was the first chairman of CORE. And while he was with CORE and Whitney Young was with the Urban League, I perhaps would have been in a more left-leaning organization.
Okay.
Yeah, and so your mother occasionally participated in events with CORE and the Urban League.
Absolutely.
Right? She
Absolutely.
was, everything I've heard about her, she was very good at building coalitions.
Yes.
And I think that speaks to that. But
I wish I had her tact and diplomacy. I have so little patience with stupidity. She was a wonderful diplomatic person.
When did you start seeing yourself as becoming a defense attorney? Was that something that you had in your mind when you were in high school, or is that something that came, you know, in college years and after?
I became a lawyer out of economic self-defense. I had to find a way to support my family, and the best way for me was through student loans. I went to Miami-Dade Community College. I did very well there. In fact, I graduated. It's not Phi Beta Kappa, it's the junior college equivalent of Phi Beta Kappa. And because of it, I got a full scholarship to Smith College, where I did graduate Phi Beta Kappa, magna cum laude.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, yeah.
And at that time, I knew that I had to continue to have an income through scholarship. And I applied to Western New England College School of Law. I was accepted and I went to law school. And the student loan money kept me able not only to support my family, but to send my son to private school so that he could have a decent start. Only motivation for me academically was to maintain and improve my family situation. I'm family centric. What my family needs, I'm going to provide by hook or by crook.
Right. Now, did you end up at Miami-Dade because you were living in Florida at that time?
Yes, yes. I was living in Miami Beach. My father had a condo down there, and he was a snowbird. So he only came down when it was winter. And other than that, I lived at 305 Jefferson Avenue, South Beach, what they now call South Beach, Miami Beach, Florida. Yes. And I have to tell you, it was the happiest day of my life when I got the scholarship to Smith College and was able to leave Florida, because they're still in the 1800s mentally in Florida. And I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand it. You see how Florida is now today, right? Well, imagine 30 years ago, it was even worse.
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
I couldn't stand it. So when I was able to go to Massachusetts, not only was I glad to leave Florida, I was one step closer to getting back home to New York. I was only trying to get back home to New York. I haven't made it yet.
Where are you now? You're not in the Bronx doing this interview?
No, I'm in Springfield, Massachusetts, still trying to get home.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you're welcome anytime, Charlotte. My wife and I don't have a very big apartment, but we got a big couch for you. So.
Thank you very much.
So you've been living in Massachusetts since you went to Smith?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. 1995 through 1998. I graduated Smith 98, went right into law school, graduated law school 2001, got a job with the Hampden County Public Defender's Office through CPCS, which is the Committee for Public Counsel Services, as a public defender in Superior Court. I did that for almost 10 years.
So one question I always ask in these interviews is, as you've gone about your life and lived in different parts of the country, we
didn't even get to California. I got a daughter and granddaughter in California.
Oh, okay. So what do you bring from your Bronx upbringing when you go to other parts of the country? How did growing up in the Bronx define you and shape your character?
It has caused me to be not only tolerant, but appreciative of people of other races, cultures, classes, and religions. I grew up as the outlier, the outsider, but I was welcomed in the community. I went to shul at 4 years of age. You know what is shul?
Yeah.
Shul was master. You know what is shul? Yeah. I learned Yiddish the same time I was speaking English.
Right.
I was able, because of my upbringing in the Bronx and my heritage through parents who were politically active, I was able to relate to all kinds of people on all kinds of levels, not only to see the humanity, but to appreciate the differences between groups of people. And essentially, that's what the Bronx used to be. And I hope it will be that way again, because I have a feeling that there is a lack of tolerance for Hispanic, Latinx people now in what's left of the white community in the Bronx. and it makes me very sad, very sad.
You know, Stephen, can we take out from this interview what Charlotte just said about the legacy of the Bronx and turn it
You can't take anything out without asking me to release it.
obviously, but
Yeah.
Okay.
You mean
do
make a
remember
clip.
I'm a lawyer.
yeah, but the thing is, what you just said is something I think could be widely shared with young people growing up in the Bronx today.
Well, you have my permission. We have to get along. Rodney King said it, lo these many years. Can't we all just get along?
And yeah, Mark, you meant not take it out. You meant like make a clip of it, right?
Yeah, make a clip of it.
Yeah.
In other words, not take it out of the interview, make a 2-minute clip of you talking about your Bronx heritage, the cultural capital of experiencing people from different cultures.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Not take it out of the interview because it shouldn't be in it, but that it should be separated and spread around as an inspirational.
You just make sure that the part about the welcomeness should extend to new residents from wherever they are from.
Absolutely.
Somalia, Guatemala, Puerto Rico, Mexico, North Korea, South Korea, wherever they're from, they should be welcome, because that's what the Bronx meant to me. It meant
and
that
it still
everybody
is that
was
way
together. We are all in this together, and we only have each other, and we better realize it, because no one's coming to help us.
Absolutely. If anything, people are coming to do the exact opposite. And
Exactly. That's what the president's program is: divide and conquer.
Yeah.
And we have to overcome that with love and compassion, understanding and appreciation. If something is new and strange, before you reject it, take a minute. Just take a minute and listen and taste and hear and understand and appreciate. Maybe you'll learn something. Maybe you'll like it. We're all the same under the skin. You go to the hospital, you're going to get the same transfusion I am. Come on. That's what the Bronx was when I grew up there.
It still is that way in many respects.
Absolutely.
I hope so.
You know, I mean, for example, I had a group of 95 elementary school students sitting in one of my classes. And I asked them, how many different countries did you and your families come from? Of 95 students and 10 teachers, 27 different countries.
Beautiful.
I asked my Fordham students how many. There were 7. So it's still going on. And the other thing, and this is what I do a lot of my research, the Bronx is still producing more varieties of popular music than any place in the United States and the world.
My brother went to school with Willie Bobo, the Salsa Plungero.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, so it's still going on. And the other thing is the Bronx has the best inexpensive ethnic food you can find anywhere.
Now, I want to put a pin in that, because the one area of the Bronx where I didn't go and didn't have any relation to was Riverdale.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's not where the good food is.
And in fact, I would say that of all of the ethnicities I have been lucky enough to come in contact with, there are certain ethnicities that have not yet warmed up to me as an African American. And I'm not going to name it, but I'm just going to say there were certain areas where I never went. One of those areas was Riverdale.
Yeah. Not many people in the Bronx go to Riverdale today still, but Riverdale's, I think, changing a bit too, probably.
I hope so.
Probably to
it's
the
their
eye
loss.
of the residents.
It's really their loss not to open up to newcomers.
Absolutely. Yeah. Newcomers are going there whether people...
Whether they like it or not.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Charlotte, I have a couple questions that touch on topics that we discussed in our first conversation, and I was hoping maybe we could have the chance to touch on some of those this time.
All right.
And I was wondering if you could tell us how Angie first ended up in New York, kind of the background with her family, why they moved to Long Island.
Yes. Yes. My mother was born in Abbeville, South Carolina.
Wow.
She was the second eldest of 4 children. Her older brother, Richard, Uncle Dick, her younger brother, William Howard Taylor, Uncle Bill, and the baby sister, Aunt Imogene. And at around the age of 5, and by the way, my mother's mother was Charlotte Romans Taylor.
Mm.
Her mother, Charlotte Romans, was a slave who was freed and then bought her husband's freedom. I'm talking about my great-great-grandmother, and this was South Carolina. When my mother was 5, a neighbor around the corner down the block, nice, in those days called colored man, was lynched. And when he was lynched, my grandmother told her husband, my grandfather, that's it, we're gone. And they packed up and left Abbeville, South Carolina, and moved to Westbury, Long Island. I don't know who they knew to go to in Westbury. My mother grew up in Westbury, Long Island, and she went to high school. She was a first-class student, of course. In fact, at 18, she won an oratory competition sponsored by the New York Times. But after school, she would go home and take in wash for the white families. And that's how she helped support herself and the family. Every day and weekends after high school, she would do wash and ironing for the white families in Westbury. At some point, she left and went to Howard University. I don't know the wherewithal, Steve, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine. Charlotte, I'll have to send you after this is done. I've been meaning to tell you this. I found a letter that your mother wrote to W.B. Du Bois back in 1928 saying, you know, I'm a high school senior, I guess.
You have
and
to.
I'm looking for a scholarship.
I got to see this. I got to see this.
She says, I'm looking for a scholarship. Do you know any place I could apply? And he suggests something. So I think, you know, it's amazing that she later befriends him as an adult too, because she was already writing to him when she was 18. So maybe his advice helped her get a scholarship. I haven't been able to figure out more, but that's what I've found out so far. But
please send me print it, send it to me in the mail.
I will.
I'm
Angie
gonna have it
Taylor,
framed.
You know.
Oh my God, Steve,
yeah.
You're giving me more than I'm giving you. I'm
so
jealous.
No. You know, I can find documents, but the living memories is what gives them life. I mean, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so, escaped South Carolina, comes to
because of the lynching.
Absolutely, goes to Howard, and eventually ends up back in New York. And do you know if they lived elsewhere in New York City before your parents moved up?
Oh yes, because at some point I'm sure she didn't stay at Howard.
Yeah.
And I know my grandmother and aunties were part of St. Augustine's Church. They lived down on off of Prospect Avenue. Prospect, not Intervale, Crotona Park, Parkway.
Prospect runs into Crotona Park.
Right, they had an apartment there. And I guess out of that area came the move next to the Coops.
Right.
Sure.
But I know they were in the area of Crotona Parkway.
Yeah, that was the largest African-American community in the Bronx that emerged in the 1930s.
What was?
Boston Road and Prospect Avenue. Morrisania, St. Augustine's.
Oh, is that Morrisania? I wasn't
that's
sure what
Morrisania.
Morrisania was.
Yeah. Mhm.
163rd and Fox and
Yeah,
Tiffany.
well, yeah.
And,
All of that.
yes.
Yeah. So much coming out of that area. I mean, even later, so many people still living in that area. Thelonious Monk lived in the area for a little bit.
It's my heart. Monk is my heart.
Yeah,
He's
me too. I love Thelonious Monk.
my heart.
Queen Mother Moore moved to the area later.
Oddly more.
Oddly Moore, exactly. She lived in the Coops for a bit too, right?
Yes, my mom helped to get the apartment.
Right.
Yeah.
When I interviewed her in 1972, she was on Stebbins Avenue, which is now Reverend James Polite Street, named after the pastor of Thessalonia Baptist Church.
I see. Yeah. Well, the only church I remember going to was one time I went to hear Adam Clayton Powell at Abyssinia. My mother knew him too.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I rode on the bus with his son, Skipper Powell, to the March on Washington.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Rode on the same bus.
And your mom was friends with a lot of other very involved figures in Harlem as well, right?
Yes, yes. And you know, now that I speak with you, I see how rare it must have been, although maybe not so, to have a woman so central to so many important conversations and operations. The white women now have the Me Too movement. Mm-hmm. My mother never had to ask Me Too anything. She was right there in the forefront. So,
and she would give them hell if anyone tried anything.
Absolutely. I told you about her leading the prayer with Florence Holman down on the White House grounds.
Tell us about it, yeah.
They said I couldn't speak, but they didn't say I couldn't pray. She was clever, very clever.
Yeah. Oh, while we have Mark here too, why don't you tell him the story about the FBI agent? That's one of my favorite stories that anyone's ever told me.
Okay, Mark, my mother, because of her and father, in fact, the whole family, we're in the FBI files.
So am I, if anything.
Oh God, that means you're a good person.
Yeah, they moved into the basement of my apartment building in 1969 to put me under surveillance.
Oh, they came that
close. I was part of the Weather Underground.
Oh, SDS.
I wasn't good enough in chemistry to make
okay.
bombs. I just beat people up.
I remember SDS.
Yeah, so if you look me up on Wikipedia, they say I was a terrorist, but
oh, I know better than
I try not to correct
that's what they call anyone who wants to challenge the system. So.
Yeah. So tell me your FBI story.
It's not mine. It's my mother's story.
Right.
An agent came to the door and rang the bell. My mother had been in the kitchen cooking, and by the way, nowadays that's all I'm doing. It's apparently my other legacy. I'm cooking all the time. She had on an apron, and I think she was carving a leg of lamb or some meat, and she came to the door, and there was a well-dressed young white boy saying, excuse me, I'd like to speak with the lady of the house. Can you get your mistress and tell her that I'd like to see her? And my mother, quick as a whip, said, yes, I'll get the lady of the house. Won't you come into the living room and have a seat? And she ushered him into the living room. She went back in the kitchen, took off her apron, did not put the knife down, and came into the living room and said, the mistress of the house is now here. And you may leave if you can get by me. And she pointed to the window. She said, we're on the ground floor. And she made him jump out the window.
Whoa!
That's how you got to treat them.
You know, it might have been different words used, but the upshot is he jumped out of the window rather than try and push past my mother. My mother was all of 5'2", maybe, on a good day with heels, but she was stocky. And she was feisty. She said, mistress of the house is now here. And I guess his jaw dropped, and he's looking, and she's here with this knife, and she was carving up meat. He said, there's two ways to leave. You can come by me, or you can jump out the window. Well, we're a ground floor apartment. And no, I used to climb out my back window to sneak out on the weekends when I was a teenager. But, you know, he jumped out the window. Never came back to the house again.
That's good. But before that, you all had to, you remember occasionally having to get up and move on a moment's notice.
At least two, if not three times in my life as a young child, we would drive across country for a vacation / learn about America trips. And we would drive through the states and all the way out to California. It would be my mother, my father, my brother, me, my father's mother sometimes. And we would be gone for maybe 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and then we would come back. And I just thought it was a break from school, learn about America. Hell, it was, you know, good times for me. It was a break. I later came to realize that we were fleeing persecution by the FBI, by Hoover, HUAC, and the goon squads.
Right.
So that was, and I remember vividly at least 2 times in California, I rode a big white stallion called Baldy up in Mount something where the telescope is. And I think I was about 4. So that would have been 52.
52, yeah. Well, they were really coming down hard on all the black leadership.
Yeah.
William Patterson, that's when he was arrested.
Yes.
And your mother led the defense committee for him, right? Do you remember?
I know she was a part of it, the Civil Rights Congress.
Yeah.
That book, We Charge Genocide. And I know she was a part of Pat's defense committee. He would have had a named white attorney, I'm sure, as the lead attorney, but I'm sure she worked on the defense and in raising funds, of course. You asked about dinner parties. We would have had many dinner parties to raise money for Pat and Louise.
Yeah. And then later for Angela Davis, too, I think I remember.
Oh, you can.
Right?
I got some stories about that.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, but that's personal, and we won't involve Mark Nason with that. I'll tell you about that when he's off.
Well, Angela Davis is a friend is a good friend.
Good. I'm glad for you.
Interesting.
Angela doesn't know me.
Oh, okay. She doesn't know you. Okay.
But I've got a story for you.
Well, I'll look forward to hearing it. But yeah, there are a number of defense committees that your mother helped organize, aside from Patterson and Angela Davis.
Tenants' rights also. She was big in tenants' rights. You know, she was a member of the International League of Women for Peace and Freedom. She helped organize that. She was foremost in the anti-war movement. And I just don't know the acronyms or the names of the groups, but she was very active in anti-war movements and particularly in getting out of Vietnam.
Sure.
Right. Now,
I think I mentioned that she was at the Paris peace talks.
Right. So what, so she was active through the 60s.
My mother's been active since the day she left the womb.
Right. So I'm just trying to think. So she was a major figure in a lot of international, anti-war protests in the 60s.
I wouldn't say a major figure because I don't know that. I know she was heavily involved.
Right.
Sure.
Okay.
And traveling to different African countries at the same time, right?
You know, she met Robert Mugabe and Joshua Nkomo when Rhodesia won its freedom. She was big in anti-colonialism movements in Africa. And she was a guest of the new government, the nascent government of Zimbabwe, and sat down with Mugabe and Nkomo on many occasions. she had a personal preference for Nkomo because she feared that Mugabe was opportunistic and would use the birth of the new nation for his own personal gain as opposed for the good of the African citizens of Zimbabwe. And as it turns out, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
I think he had Nkomo killed. And, you know, she was aware of, I don't know on what level, but I know she was aware of and supported Patrice Lumumba. She was in Angola and SWAPO, and there were factions that she was involved with one group as opposed to the other. My memory is gone, Steve, but she was very much involved in the struggle for liberation for the African countries.
Sure. And was she still living in the Bronx in between her travels, or?
Oh yeah, we lived in H1.
Okay, so she lived in the Bronx until her death.
That same apartment I was born and raised in was where she died in Montefiore, but that she left H1 to go to Montefiore to have knee replacement surgery. And they killed her.
Oh
boy, knee replacement.
Double
knee replacement. Wow.
Yeah.
They didn't monitor her sufficiently, and a bone chip worked its way from the surgery into her lungs, and she exsanguinated.
Oh my God.
She bled internally to death in the hospital.
Jesus Christ.
I wanted to sue him. My father wouldn't let me. I tried to talk him into suing Montefiore and the doctors.
What year was that?
I don't know. What year did my mother die, Stephen?
1981.
80, I thought.
Oh, maybe 80 or 81.
80? I think it was 80. It could have been 81.
I'd have to look again.
I think it was 80.
Yeah.
That's an awful story.
I read the 23rd Psalm at her memorial, at her funeral.
Mm-hmm.
Where was her funeral held? Was it a private thing? Or?
In a church. I don't remember which one.
Yeah, in the Bronx, or?
I don't remember. It must have been too painful. I know there was an open casket, and when I went and saw her, my words were, "That's not mommy."
Yeah.
I had never seen a dead person before, much less in a casket. And I went up, I was going to kiss her, and I didn't kiss her because that's not mommy.
Yeah. I'm sorry to hear that, Charlotte.
Yeah.
Your father lived for a while, a lot longer.
Oh,
right?
yes.
Right?
Oh, yes, he did. He moved down to Florida.
Yeah.
And he kind of went a little off after my mother passed. It took me 10 years to get over my mother passing. I went off too. I kind of lost it for 10 years because she was so very critical to my existence. I was in a deep depression for a full 10 years.
Yeah. You never really get over it either, you know?
Well, I thought I was over it, but now I'm crying.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, let's go back to some happier memories. Why don't you say something about the bus company that your parents?
Okay, Dickerson Bus and Mayflower Coach. Because of my father's history in transportation, and I'll just put in a pin, my mother was a better driver than my father any day of the week. Coming back from California on one of our trips, I'll tell you a little story. My father had been driving. Ange, I'm tired. Will you take the wheel? And so she did. He went to sleep, and about an hour or so later, he looked up and said, we're in Kansas or somewhere, New Mexico, somewhere. And he said, how did we get there? How did we get here? And she said, I just kept driving. She was driving over 100 miles an hour down Route 66 to get out of the territory. 100 miles an hour. She was the best driver I ever saw. So because my father had been in transportation as a chauffeur, in 1954, he bought a bottle green Cadillac, the limousine that once belonged to the brother of John Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State. And he bought the Cadillac and started a limousine business. And he would chauffeur and hire and for rent. And they saved and scrimped, and he was able to get a bus, a school bus, and applied for a license for charter bus work. And he applied to get a contract with the New York City Board of Education to carry handicapped and blind children. He had already gotten a contract with the Lighthouse for the Blind to carry adults and children. And because of his good reputation, the contract went on to the Board of Ed. And so they had the Dickerson bus, did contract work for the Board of Ed for various groups. And they also had the limousine service, and he had station wagons. He would charter out the wagons for people who wanted to go to Kinderland or various small Atlantic City. And he up and down the I-95 corridor. I think I mentioned that they took me to the hearing when my mother and father applied for ICC rights to do interstate commerce. And at that time, you couldn't just drive throughout the states. You had to be licensed by the ICC, a federal regulatory group that gave licenses to various transportation companies that wanted to pursue interstate commerce. And they didn't have any Black companies. And my mother went. She always did the talking. My father was perhaps the figurehead. He was there and he would speak. But when it came time to make the argument as to why we should be granted whatever we were looking for, it was my mother who made the argument. And that particular time, they brought me with them. I believe I was 12, not quite 13. So that would have been 60. And the adjuster, administrator, the agent asked, why should we grant you a license? And my mother turned to me and said, Charlotte, why do you think we should be granted a license? And I gave testimony at 12 years old how all of my Black and people of color were very often prejudiced by not being able to hire white companies. White companies would refuse to provide transportation services to Black communities, even church groups, because they're gonna roughhouse and ruin our equipment. They're gonna tear it up. We don't carry that kind of people. And I gave personal experiences about that to the ICC. That was one way that Dickerson Bus was able to get an ICC license for interstate commerce, travel, and transportation. Further in the history of our transportation business, my mother allied with a company in Yonkers, and its owner was Nicholas Iozzo, I-O-Z-Z-O. And that's when Mayflower Coach Corporation was formed. It was my mother who had made the arrangements. Once again, I have a story which I'll tell Steve that I'm not mentioning to Mark about how my mother happened to become allied with Yonkers, New York Italian transportation company, but that's how Mayflower Coach was formed. And by forming Mayflower Coach, there was not only access to capital, but there was certain cachet with the banks being allied with a white bus company. So now it was one company, an interracial company, and that was to the benefit of Mr. Iosa in Yonkers. It broadened his customer base, and it was to our benefit as well, giving us access to a white customer base.
Sure, sure. So, I mean, just, you know, the titles you can apply to your mom are, it's crazy. It's, you know, activist,
she broke the mold.
businesswoman. I mean, you know, just literally, she had her
She
hand.
broke the mold. She was Renaissance before Renaissance was born.
She should be sort of held up as kind of a Bronx hero.
Absolutely.
She is a Bronx hero. I tell you that I named my son after her.
Angelo.
Stephen, why don't you write a biography of her?
Angelo and I want to. Angelo said he's that's her grandson is working on it, and hopefully we can put something together, because, you know, what I'm also hoping to do is I'm trying to hunt down recordings of your mother, because I think it'd be a great idea.
You ever heard her speak?
That's what I've heard.
Ever heard her speak? There's no preacher in the world that can move a congregation like my mother can move the man in the street. She broke it down so that anyone could understand.
Yeah, but, you know, a biography with some speeches by her, I think that would be.
I think that would be a wonderful contribution.
Yeah,
you're the research specialist. You find them.
I've got a couple leads right now. Things are a little slow with the pandemic, of course, but
you know, you might see if any of the older CP U.S.A. People had any written.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. Could you please repeat what you said?
Siri came on. I don't know why.
You said CP U.S.A. That's why.
That's the FBI. They're still.
They're still watching you.
I'm sure. I'm not surprised.
But yeah, that's a good idea. I'll see. I've been contacting places where she spoke right now, but yeah, I'll try to hunt down some people. But yeah, I think in the I don't want to take up too much of either of your time.
Okay.
Is there anything else that occurs to you that you'd like to share, Charlotte?
You know, I'm better when you ask me direct and pointed questions.
Sure.
I really apologize.
Oh,
my memory is.
This was a very powerful and important interview for all sorts of reasons. And again, that passage where you talked about.
Oh, excuse me. Let me put a pin before I forget. I'm sorry, Mark. You might want to get in touch with Charlene Mitchell.
Yeah. Charlene Mitchell,
Steve.
Sure.
Charlene Mitchell, because she's younger and she would have been around, and she worked with Pat and my mother.
Yeah. Actually, when Angela Davis spoke at Fordham 15 years ago, I drove her to Esplanade Gardens to Charlene Mitchell's house.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, yeah.
You can put me in, or I'm sure you still have her. I mean, you probably still have her contact information, Mark. Yeah?
I could actually ask it. I'll write to Angela Davis to see if she has it, because I knew the building she lived in. I didn't know, I didn't have her.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, I'd love to talk to Angela too. I've seen her speak before, but I've never met her personally.
Yeah.
I've never met her either, but I have a story for you when he gets off.
Not for public consumption.
Well, let me get off then. So.
I'll go ahead and end the recording here in a second. But Mark, do you have any other questions that occurred to you before?
Not at this point. I would just reinforce the importance of doing a biography of her. I think, she's a figure that.
Dr. Angie Dickerson, Doctor of Humane Letters.
From Allen University, right?
Allen University.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I will leave the two of you, Charlotte. It's great to
meet you. Nice meeting you. Send me that book from Amazon.
And you get Stephen the information, and then I'll order it. It's sent to you. And,
thank you very much. It's a pleasure meeting you.
Likewise.
My son went to law school at Fordham.
Oh, okay. So again, if you want to find my own movement record, you can look up my Wikipedia page, which
I
will
will,
make me seem even more dangerous than I actually was.
Oh, they lie about all of us. It was my
you.
pleasure meeting you.
Likewise,
And I hope
Charlotte.
to see you
take
again
care.
sometime.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.